It's the name itself, Mercia. That's the Latinization of Mercia, which just means the borderlands. It literally means the borderlands. Now, that's liminality. That's a threshold. We are walking the borderlands. And that's what started the whole Mystery of Mercia project. The fact that we are living, or Midlanders are living in a literal borderland. All of these strange places where anything could happen, where we're in a threshold, we're in a liminal place between, just by the name itself. And there are areas of Mercia where that's the reality. It struck me as soon as I started exploring the area in earnest, how kind of odd and how some of these weird places along there that appear to have no reason for them being there. Well, I'm not really that surprised when strange things happen and have happened. You're traveling through time, through places, history, cultures, everything.
The voice you just heard was Hugh Williams, folklorist, author, researcher, and explorer of those strange borderlands where history, folklore, and the supernatural have a habit of meeting. Born in Worcester, at the heart of the Midlands, Hugh has spent years travelling through its landscapes, walking old paths, seeking out forgotten ruins, ancient monuments, churches, caves and waterways, and following the stories attached to them. Because for Hugh, researching folklore isn't simply about finding a story in a book. It's about going to the place where that story belongs, standing in the landscape, listening to it, experiencing its atmosphere, and considering what changes when history and folklore are encountered not simply as words on a page, but in the very places that shape them. As Hugh puts it during our conversation, there is an elusive atmosphere that can only really be understood by being there. The shadows, the quiet, the sound of water beneath an old bridge, and then the knowledge of the stories associated with that place. Sometimes, he says, it can feel as though these stories have somehow become soaked into the landscape itself. That approach runs through all of Hugh's books and lies at the heart of Mystery of Mercia, Hugh's wider exploration of the Midlands and its stranger histories. Across his work, Hugh draws together landscape, history, folklore, supernatural belief and lived experience, taking us into a Midlands far stranger and richer than its comparatively modest place within popular folklore might suggest. As he points out in our conversation, this is a region containing an extraordinary diversity of history, geography, and story, mountains and great rivers, castles and megaliths, yet one which he feels remains significantly underrepresented. His books explore that landscape from different directions, uncovering its mysteries and forgotten stories, while the magic of Mercia turns towards the history of witchcraft and magic in the Midlands, and challenges some of the modern myths that have become attached to them. Hugh describes wanting to create something accessible, while returning these subjects to their historical context, separating later assumptions from what the records actually tell us. And that question of how stories change is something we return to again and again, because folklore isn't static. It moves between generations. It adapts. It absorbs new fears and new ideas. A Victorian ghost story can become inseparable from the identity of a place. An unexplained experience today can become part of its folklore tomorrow. Hugh gives a wonderful example later in our conversation of contemporary experiences gathering around an ancient site until collectively they begin creating an entirely new layer of folklore. In this conversation, we also venture into some much darker territory. We discuss witchcraft accusations and cunning folk, and why the historical reality is often considerably more complicated than the version that survives in popular culture, We explore ghost traditions and haunted landscapes, the importance of atmosphere in paranormal experience, devil folklore, ancient places and liminal spaces, and the strange experiences that continue to attach themselves to particular locations. And beneath all of this is another fascinating question. Do places acquire stories because there is something unusual about them? Or do centuries of stories change the way we experience those places? Hugh has his own intriguing thoughts about that, particularly when it comes to hauntings. Rather than necessarily interpreting paranormal activity as the spirits of identifiable dead people, he wonders whether place, expectation, human emotion, and something less easily defined might interact. Whether, in his words, we somehow complete the circuit. It's an idea that brings us neatly back to where we began. The Borderlands. Not simply borders on a map, but thresholds between past and present, history and story, landscape and memory, belief and experience. Places where, as Hugh says, you really don't know what might happen next. Get ready to explore the pages of history, folklore, and ghost lore as we walk the Borderlands with Hugh Williams. Hi there, Hugh. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Michelle, and thanks for having me on.
So, do you want to start by just maybe telling the listeners what first drew you into folklore and how did those early experiences shape the work that you do today?
Okay, I was born in Worcester, the centre of the Midlands. It's a very, very old city, and we have a lot of medieval architecture, a lot of Civil War history, etc. But you don't have to travel far to reach the countryside either. So I grew up with that sort of best of both worlds. And I have to give most of the credit to my mother, because she was very interested in the folklore and the traditions of the area. She was Scottish. She was from Glasgow. She wanted to get out of the city and look for something else. And she was always talking about Robin Redbreast, things like that. And at the age of 10 or 11, I had no idea what Robin Redbreast was. Fantastic folk horror tinged play, as I'm sure you're aware. But she was always talking about things like that. And she had books on the shelf for witchcraft and magic, and sort of sinister fiction, M.R. James, King Janus's The Green Man, that sort of thing. And so I built up with that sort of interest, and Mum really encouraged it. So it was natural that I would, have that sort of inkling as I grew. Now, obviously, you become a teenager, you become self-obsessed, peer pressure, etc. But as an adult, I picked up the interest again, and then I think during COVID, like a lot of people, I had the time to reflect and think, I want to actually do something about this. I want to share my passion and see what others think about it. And it kind of went from there, really.
So your research has kind of always been rooted in physically exploring these places rather than, simply just reading about them. What has walking the landscapes of these locations taught you then about those areas that you've brought to your books, etc.?
It's that elusive atmosphere, which you can't feel unless you were there. I can describe it in the book, and I do attempt to. Try to involve the reader as much as I can. But you have to go there really to feel that magic. Some of these places, I could describe an old Packhorse Bridge somewhere, for instance, in the Derbyshire Peak District. It's a nice little vignette. I'll sort of describe that. But unless you actually go there at the right time, with those shadows, with that quiet, with the sounds of the water underneath it, you're not going to feel the same thing. And then when I tell the stories, what went on at that Packhorse Bridge, perhaps an old murder or sort of something happened like that, something more sinister. You really look around and you kind of feel it in the place. It's soaked into it. It's difficult to say. It really is an elusive thing. This atmosphere, and every location has its own atmosphere. So I can't lay down a blanket rule on that. I could go to the aforementioned Packhorse Bridge, but then I could go to, say, a ruined church in the middle of a wood, completely overgrown, barely anybody knows about it. And that has a completely different atmosphere. So I think where possible, we should go out to these places and check them out and attempt to connect with the place and attempt to feel that magic. It is a connection. Magic is stirred up by people. There has to be, we conduct it, we complete the circuit. It only occurs when somebody is there and they can feel it. So we need to go there as people and create that magic. I hope that goes some way towards answering that question.
I think it does. And I think, just to kind of echo what you were just saying, I think, part of that connection, that kind of circular connection between the landscape and us, is recognizing that if you do get to go there and explore, you are treading the same earth that someone would have walked across 100 years ago. Some of the landscape will be identical.
Yes.
And there is nothing more magical than that.
I say this a lot in my writing. There are some landscapes, I'll say the Peak District again, but there are a lot of other parts of Britain. You look as far as your eye can see, there's nothing there. There is no civilization at all, no telegraph poles, no nothing. So the sounds, the smells, it's what people would have experienced thousands of years ago, possibly. Even right back to the Neolithic age. Yes, forests are managed. I understand that. Estates are managed, moorlands, etc. They're managed, but it's still a natural environment. An ancient woodland, none of the trees were around thousands of years ago, but it's still been a constantly regenerating and managed woodland. It's always been that. So you are quite right. You are literally walking in the footsteps of possibly even your ancestors. And there's a magic in that. There really is. It's time travel, almost. And that's magic. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And for me, folklore is for everyone. It connects us to our past. It connects us to our present. It connects us to our future. And that connection is the heartbeat of our communities and our landscape, with this shared common language. Why do you think folklore is important? What can these local communities, these local stories, teach us that historical records just often cannot?
Folklore is more than just stories. It's food, dishes, dances, music, occasions, Canada customs, that sort of thing, clothes, everything, costumes. It's, folklore is everything. It's often described as the intangible heritage of a fixed place. So it's therefore something that isn't easy to describe. It's just something that we do. Folklore is handed down through people. So when I hear a story, for instance, there's a place in Worcester called the Devil's Ark. It's a kind of a subway thing that runs underneath a railway. Now, in my day, we were told that if you went down there at midnight and you said the Lord's Prayer backwards, the devil would appear at one end. And when you turned around to escape, he's at the other end. And you keep going back, and then he gradually closes in on the person, as they scream, and that's the end of it. So my son, he was out with his friends. He came back in on his bike, and he said he'd been down Devil's Arch, and he told me the story. And I hadn't related that story to him. He picked it up from somebody else. So there's like a 40-year stretch there of that story only existing in the oral form. And I think that's fantastic. There was an example right there in my home of that sort of thing. So folklore, it as you say, it is for everybody. You should tell everybody about it. You should transmit it. Otherwise, it will shrivel and die. Folklore can change. It can adapt. It can evolve. And it can absorb other traditions into it. Yeah, we know that. It's ever-changing. Of course it is. But it's still very important for us to, the central core of the folklore idea, of the story or the calendar custom or whatever, that central core. We must keep that. We must keep that alive. Basically, the reason why we do it. Why do we do it? I don't know. It's just something within us. We want more. We don't always want to be told stories by others. We don't want to hear the news. We don't always want to hear bad news. We don't always want to watch sport, but we want something that isn't the reality that we live in. We don't want to zone out and drop out. We just want to hear something that's maybe a little different to what we're used to hearing. And I think that sort of defines folklore. It's something that we express that you don't have to write it down. You can write books about it, and plenty of us do, but it still exists nonetheless in that form. It's transmitted. I'm kind of going all over the place on this because that is the nature of folklore. It is a very big tent, and it's a very big subject, and it is actually quite difficult to define because of all the different forms of it. I mean, a traditional pudding baked in Gloucestershire, what's that got to do with a strange dance that people do in Derbyshire? Well, it's folklore. It's a custom. It's a tradition. The stories, I mean, often, ghost stories now are folklore because we pass them down. You could have a ghost story that was first told during the Victorian age. We're still investigating it now. Surely that's folklore because it's become part of the fabric of the place. You can't visit this place without hearing that story.
But it's such a meaty topic, like you pointed out, and it does change, it does morph, it's different from county to county, country to country, and it's really just that reflection of that ever-changing belief system and customs, the things that were important to people at that time in that region. And I think that's what makes it special because, when we think about, and I teach history, so I can say this as an educator, but when we teach history, so much of what we teach, the history that we share, is not about the everyday common person. It's history that's been recorded by a certain part of the population, usually very educated people, and they are sharing history through a particular lens. And folklore, I think, tells history of the masses, the beliefs, the fears, the things they thought about, the things that mattered, the everyday customs and traditions that held them together. And that, I think, tells us so much about how we have lived amongst each other. And I think within that, we find the connections to those groups of people because we see those same shared thoughts and those same shared fears and those same shared questions seeping through in that type of storytelling that has survived because they still matter. They are still relevant. And I think that's, again, that connective element that you spoke of earlier.
Yes, I agree. And this goes back to another subject, the representation of working class people within folklore. Because most folklore arose out of the working class, the workers in the field, the rural workers, the millers, the weavers, the labourers. That's where it came from. Now, it was gathered up by middle and upper class people and then almost handed back to the working classes in the form of these formalised stories. But the folklore itself, the source material, is still bubbling away there. And it's very important that we keep that going. Folklore can't just exist in collections of stories put out by academics. No, it exists within the working classes of Britain, and the world. That's where folklore is most prevalent, and it is very important that we keep that representation and that recognition that is where the folklore is coming from. That is its source. Things like Canada customs, like the Cooper's Hill cheese rolling, that's very much a working class activity. It always has been. And on the more extreme end, the Atherstone street football that is held on Shrove Tuesday, which to the untrained eye just looks like a brawl. It looks like just a mass brawl. And it is in some cases, because the way that they play the game now, they just retreat with the ball into a shop doorway and defend it until the end. And a lot of people are horrified by it, by the violence and the sort of, but that is the reality of it. That's a working class activity that has gone on since the 1300s, almost exactly in that form, and they're still playing it today. So it is very important that folklore is maintained at the level that it is generated from, if that makes sense.
Just kind of following on from that, I mean, obviously, your books are centered on Mercia rather than the modern county boundaries. What
Yes.
makes that such a fascinating landscape in which to explore the history that we've been talking about and the folklore and the supernatural for you?
Well, choosing the term Mercia instead of just the Midlands allows me to sort of cast my net just a little bit wider to encompass Gloucestershire, right up to the gates at Manchester, I guess, right across to Peterborough. But it's the name itself, Mercia. That's the Latinization of Mercia, which just means the borderlands. It literally means the borderlands. Now, that's liminality. That's a threshold. We are walking the borderlands, and that's what started the whole Mystery of Mercia project. The fact that we are living, or Midlanders are living in a literal borderland. All of these strange places, but where anything could happen. Where we're in a threshold, we're in a liminal place between, just by the name itself. And there are areas of Mercia where that's the reality. If you look at the border between Wales and Herefordshire, it's a strange place. The Golden Valley, you go around there, and it's a very odd atmosphere around there. The author Phil Rickman really tapped into that idea with his Merrily Watkins series of books, if you're familiar with them. And he set most of them around that area, and he felt that too. It struck me as soon as I started exploring the area in earnest, how kind of odd and how some of these weird places along there that appear to have no reason for them being there. So yeah, that in answer to that, the Midlands or Old Mercia is a literal borderland. That's how I see it. I see it as a liminal place where I'm not really that surprised when strange things happen and have happened. That's the answer to that really. Mercia is the borderlands. That is my project. It's the board we are exploring. We are walking the borderlands. They could be between time, as we spoke about before, with that feeling that you're walking in the footsteps, possibly even your own ancestors. You're traveling through time, through places, history, cultures, everything. I think it's wonderful. I mean, if you look at a city like Birmingham, all these different cultures mashed up, anything can happen. And I related this in my first book, I think. There was actually an urban legend grew up from the Muslim community in Birmingham about a vampire that was going around attacking people. Crazy, story. The Ward End vampire. There was this mass hysteria. Police were gathered outside schools and things. People were rushing to get their children home before the sun went down because people really thought there was a vampire going around attacking people. It's crazy, but that just shows that there you have that sort of that liminality, because Birmingham is a great big crossroads. It really is. It is the iron, the metal crossroads of the country. So it's no wonder that strange things happen at a place like that. So that's how I see it. It's one massive liminal place, one massive threshold where you really don't know what's going to happen next.
And I think you said it so beautifully. It's where you kind of see this boundary between the history and the myth. It just crosses over. There is no end point. And again, there's something very magical about that, because you have these places then where you can understand that, things like the supernatural flourishes. These stories flourish, these mythical elements flourish because of, like you said, the liminality of it. And I've, had the pleasure of speaking with other folklorists who see that same kind of aspect creeping into the regions that they particularly focus on. Shropshire, for example, with that close connection with the borders of Wales, you see that same liminality.
Yes.
And again, I think it just makes them very unique places for folklore, because it kind of seems to have that element where you have this melting pot of different things that makes it such a magical liminal place where, like you said, being able to explore then the accounts and the stories that come out of that is endless.
Oh,
there's so much that comes
yes.
out of it. It's like a treasure trove.
Yeah, a perfect example would be Dovedale on the Derbyshire-Staffordshire border, because that's a river valley. Now, okay, you have a river, that's liminal to begin with. The river forms a border between the two counties. There's another threshold. So you make your way along this river valley, and it's riddled with caves and weird rock formations. Caves, again, are liminal because they're seen as entrances, portals to the underworld, to something below us. But they're not quite there. They're in between our world and there. So there is a perfect example of that. That's liminality concentrated almost. A walk along the Dovedale, and there are some very strange features along Dovedale. Absolutely, Reynard's Cave. Everybody stops at the steps, the stepping stones, and have their picnics. But if you walk a little bit further, you're going to find much more interesting places than that. If you can make that journey, and that's another thing. Not everybody is able to get about. They can't all see these places. Perhaps they're physically challenged. Financial circumstances, transport. There are lots of reasons why you can't do it. And I get communications from people about that all the time. Sometimes thanking me for describing a place to them, which they couldn't get to. So for that reason alone, it's worth doing what I'm doing as well.
Oh, I think it's magical what you're doing. I mean, I was only having this conversation with my mum in the last few days because she is precisely one of those people for whom you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
She has been physically unable to get about for the last few years. And more recently, she had a really, really significant, awful fall that has really impacted on her quality of being able to get about even within the house. So seeing videos, hearing someone's description of a place in the way that you do is the same as bringing that person along with you on that walk. It's the same as them standing there and seeing that landscape with their own eyes. It is bringing that person into that moment and sharing it with them. And again, I think this is where the difference between physically walking and doing it and sharing it in that manner compared to just reading about it in a book is very different. It's very visceral, being able to share it in the way that you do across your different social media platforms is just fantastic. I think that is, again, another really important thing that we need to try and preserve because, that visual element, that kind of transformative element that comes from seeing it and experiencing it in that way. For many
Yes.
people, that's the hook, that's the draw, that's what brings them in. And suddenly the world, you can see it in a completely different way then.
Yeah, this is why I try to keep a conversational tone in my books too, because it's almost as if the reader is walking along with me. On some of the
Yeah.
chapters, that is exactly what I have in mind. The aforementioned Dovedale, that is exactly what I'm trying to do, as if we're walking along and I'm waffling. I mean, I may be boring you, I don't know, but I'm going to keep talking. And that's what it's like. Sometimes a friend will come along, on a hike with me, and I'll be exploring everything. It takes twice as long because I'm very passionate about what I do, and I will talk and talk and talk at a place. That's why I prefer to work alone for that reason. But yes, that's what I do. I try and keep that down to earth, conversational tone. I'm a working class lad, and that's how I was brought up, and that's how I've always operated. Just speak to the person next to you as a human being, strike up a conversation, let's have a chat. And I will always keep that tone in my work. Yes, you're right. It's important.
So what did you hope readers would discover about the Midlands, about Mercia, that perhaps they hadn't appreciated before? Anything beyond what we've already spoken of?
Perhaps it's diversity of everything, of history, stories, places, geography, the landscape. It has so much squashed into those few counties. We have mountains, great rivers, castles, megaliths, everything packed into this area. The Midlands doesn't get enough representation. It never has. There are lots of books, documentaries, TV shows, etc. Sort of, Yorkshire, the Pendle Witches, Southwest Wales, the South Scotland, plenty of that. But the Midlands just doesn't get enough. Roy Palmer did his Folklore series, working around the counties. He did some fantastic work. His Folklore Worcestershire is a classic. I mean, my copy is falling to bits. I refer to it so much. But there hasn't been enough about the Midlands specifically. It's the centre of England. It was once the most powerful kingdom in the Anglo-Saxon world for a time under Offa. So perhaps people don't realise that. And there are other things that I'd like to get out. I mean, for example, during World War II, if the Germans had been successful in invading Britain, then the government was going to pull back, apparently, to Worcester, because Winston Churchill quite fancied Spetchley Court, which is a gigantic mansion and estate just on the edge of Worcester, on the southeast edge. He wanted to work there. So they were going to pull back, and they were going to use what is now the West Mercia Police headquarters at Hindlip Hall, which is where the War Office were going to meet. So it's always been a very, very important place in the history of Britain and England specifically. During the Anglo-Saxon age as well. I mean, I think, we all know about Lady Godiva, but Worcester was one of her favourite places. Her husband, Leofric of Mercia, it was his. He maintained a hall there. There was a wooden post from that hall, stayed for centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years, and got built into every structure that was raised on that spot, right up until the sort of 1600s. And then it finally vanished and went. But they still called that address, I think it was called Leofric's Post, or the Earl's Post. So Worcester, the centre of the Midlands, has been seen as an important place. And the Midlands itself, it's vital to the history of Britain. Perhaps people didn't know that, in answer to the question.
But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of underrepresentation, and I think this is an area that is clearly one of them. And I'm not sure why. I really don't understand why. But it does seem to be a glaring gap in something that is not as kind of common and that has not been shared, either on TV or in podcasts. It doesn't have that same coverage as some other areas, and it baffles me.
Absolutely, yeah.
The range and the diversity, it's incredible.
Yes, and the cities themselves, like Birmingham. Birmingham, for some reason, just doesn't get associated with history or folklore. It's okay. We've got the Tolkien connection that often gets brought up, the industrial heritage, and perhaps some of the 20th century heritage, music, Black Sabbath, heavy metal, etc. But it doesn't get. There's a whole lot more to the history of Birmingham, and not the boring history. You're on your school field trip yawning. That's not what I want to subject people to. I want to tell them about the odd, weird history and how they could possibly relate to that. And some of it also is being shaped and changed, that history. But I want to try and present it in the context of the time. I make no excuses for how people behave or the things people say with their sort of political and social sensibilities of the time. I just present it as it happened. So I make no comment or apology or whatever for it. It was what it was. But you had sort of things like the Lunar Circle in Birmingham, which is a group of local tycoons and bigwigs who would sit and meet on every full moon and decide how they would build Birmingham up, this sort of utopian ideal for the workers. The workers had no say in it, just these tycoons. And today it's presented as this wonderful, sort of liberal, sort of dedicated to freedom. But that really wasn't the case. And I think people need to see it from the viewpoint of working class people at the time.
But just to kind of follow on from that, because I think this is also part of what you've done so well in revisiting and exploring aspects that, again, maybe haven't had that same coverage as other parts of the country. And I think what you did when you came to write The Magic of Mercia was look at these stories and these misconceptions about witchcraft and folk magic that, again, I think really did need to be revisited. Was that intentional?
Yes. What drove me to write The Magic of Mercia was social media, seeing the sort of memes and AI things floating around that were nonsense, but people believe it. You could argue and say, well, Hugh, that's just folklore. We're doing what you do. But not really. Somebody just decided on that day, oh, I think this is what happened. I've created a meme about it. I'm going to put it on Facebook. And now everybody believes it. So I wanted to tackle some of the myths and then present an accessible timeline of magic and witchcraft in the Midlands specifically, so that people can easily understand it. Just to sit for those people, the people that like to scroll Facebook, X, etc., and look at memes like that. Here's a book that's accessible, and it's an easy to understand timeline. And we do break some myths. Yes, absolutely. Things I do not want to get political about this or even social, but some of the things, for instance, witchcraft, it was all a pagan survival. I mean, I think better people than me have tackled this before, Professor Hutton and others. But, it had nothing to do with paganism. There were no witches. The things that people were being accused of, maleficium, you're consorting with the devil. Basically, you are the devil's instrument. So, well, that wasn't happening. Nothing was happening like that. There were no witches in that sense of the word. To be called a witch back then was just an insult. Nobody would call themselves a witch. You might call yourself a doctor, a wise man, a wise woman, a nanny, something like that, cunning folk. But you wouldn't call yourself a witch, because that meant specifically that crime of the devil using you to commit maleficium, to sins on people, visiting sins on people. That was what witchcraft meant. Nobody was. I'm speaking just for England here. Okay, I'm not going into Scotland. That's a different argument. But in England, very few people were persecuted for herbalism, treating illnesses, wounds. No, the only time that happened was when you had a disgruntled client who would then accuse you of witchcraft. We must. It is very important to draw that line. That was not what a witch was. Cunning folk were not witches. They were not carrying out witchcraft. They didn't see it as such. I mean, they're using Christian incantations. They're bringing on saints. They're praying to saints, to Christ, to Mary first and foremost. So this wasn't paganism at all. It was nothing to do with that either. They weren't carrying on some unbroken tradition from the 400s. That just wasn't what was happening at all. People were just doing what they felt was the right thing to do to generate that magic at the time. And it just had nothing to do with invoking any pagan gods. It was nothing to do with that. And it wasn't witchcraft either. Witchcraft was this very specific, very narrow definition of behavior. And it's just incredible that it grew to such an extent, how it got completely out of hand and out of control. It's tragic. And also the social reality. Who was reporting the witches? It was other women, mostly. Women were reporting women. Now, it was absolutely a patriarchal society, of course, absolutely. Women alone had very little agency, authority there. So they were just working within what they had, what agency they had. And it may have given somebody in a small community a sense of that they had some power, some agency, that they've accused somebody of witchcraft, and then the authorities have moved in and done something with it. They may feel, oh wow, I have some power in this society. That maybe I'm just sort of speculating there, but it wasn't a case where, oh, let's just round up all the women oppressed them. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. It was a lot more complex than that. Because sometimes women were brought in to do some of the examining in some cases. Only in some cases. And this isn't to excuse any behaviour, because men treated women dreadfully back then. Their social role, everything. It was awful. And it was absolutely a patriarchal society as far as the pathways of power went. That's absolutely right. I'm not minimising that at all. I'm just talking about at the lower end, at where the witchcraft was actually happening within the community. There were very often disputes between groups of women when you read about the cases, when you actually look at the facts and the statements around it. So it wasn't like at Salem, for instance. But again, that was on the say-so of a teenage girl. In fact, most cases in England were brought about by either women or children. I'd say sort of 7 out of 10 of them. And so that was possibly a myth as well. But I'm not saying this out of spite or to fight some social issue. Not at all. I'm just reporting the facts as they are. So perhaps those were two things that people maybe weren't aware of. That women did accuse other women as much as men accused them, and that paganism had very little to do with it, and what was the actual nature of witchcraft itself.
You said something just a moment ago, which I think is absolutely spot on. It's a very complex issue and a very complex topic that I think has almost had a kind of a broad sweep of the brush. Some of that detail, some of that context has become lost. And part of that is obviously, examining historical records, actually having an understanding of what took place.
Yes.
But I also think part of it is not necessarily looking at and examining the subtle differences and the uniqueness of what transpired again from county to county, and how, it could be different in particular communities. It depended on what was happening. And this comes back to precisely what you were talking about, which is that, this was a community-driven thing.
Elderly women were being vilified for the simple reason that they were an annoyance. And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I don't think elderly people are an annoyance, but at that time, if you were a widow or you're an elderly spinster, to use the archaic term, you had nothing. You had no income, nothing. You relied on the charity of your neighbours. So these elderly ladies were going around tapping on doors. Give me some bread, please, and I'll go away. That's what would happen. Bread, butter, pottage, whatever. And they would go door to door doing this because they had nothing. They had no income. They're beggars, basically. But they're beggars in the community. They have a home. So this sort of talk about, witchcraft was invented to take their property off them. There was no property to take. No, that's a ludicrous thing to say. Obviously, the aforementioned Salem, again, that's a completely different thing. But here in England, in most of the rural communities, there was very little property to actually confiscate. Sometimes these ladies became very bitter. And I mean, I would. If I was in my 70s and I could barely exist, and I relied on people handing me bread and butter and milk every day because they felt sorry for me, some of them became quite bitter, and they bang on doors and they would demand things with menaces. As some of the cases that I list in The Magic of Mercia, there was a case where an old lady bit a little girl's finger. So the girl said she was a witch. She bit me and now I'm bewitched. But the old lady successfully fought the case. So the charges were dropped. But that was the kind of thing, that was in Worcestershire and in Astley. But that's the kind of thing that was happening. Just everyday stories like that. But I mean, the worst case, you talk about all the circumstances are different. The one that haunts me, awful case, poor Catherine Huxley at Evesham in Worcestershire. Now here you have a young woman, a beggar. She had nothing, again, nothing. So she's just sitting sheltering in a ditch outside the town and begging from people. Now she just goes off to rest in the shade. Some children see her and they start throwing stones at her. She throws a few back and gets out of control, gets a bit wild. She wants them to leave her alone. They won't leave her alone. But she says, I'll give you some, I'll give you all the stones you want. I'll make sure plenty of stones come your way. And then she ran off. And then it's reported then that the girl began passing these little stones through her system. Now, this was quite a common trope in possessions and sort of cases of curses and witchcraft during the 1600s, 1700s. So you had this going on, passing pins and needles and sharp stones and things. They weren't really passing stones. But because the family of the little girl who was convincing her parents she was passing these stones were very well to do, they were believed that this girl, this beggar, Catherine Huxley, had bewitched her. And Catherine was dragged to Worcester, tried and convicted, and hanged for witchcraft. I mean, imagine that. You can barely exist on what food you can beg. Some children come and throw stones at you and bully you, and then they go and tell the authorities that you're a witch and you've cursed one of them, and now you're being led to the gallows. It's absolutely horrible. That one haunts me. It really does. I can't imagine what that poor young lady how she was feeling, what she was thinking. But that case only went ahead because of the social standing of the family at the centre of it. Richard Baxter, the cleric of Kidderminster, in his Certainty of the World of Spirits, he recounted the story, and he kept saying over and over, but they are such good people that we can't doubt them. Why would they lie? I mean, it's a ludicrous story, but they really believed that it was happening. People were coming round to the house and taking the stones away as souvenirs. They ended up burying a lot of them in the garden. And when they moved out, people came in and they were digging them up, looking for the stone. Crazy, absolutely mad. But there it is. But there was an awful story. But as you say, different social conditions there. That wasn't. It was a very much working class person being victimised by a middle class family for no other reason that their daughter accused her. It's just an awful case, horrible. That one really haunts me. Rest in peace, Catherine Huxley. But that's a terrible story.
Just kind of following on from that, it's one of those that should haunt us.
Mm.
And again, this is why I think, the fact that you are revisiting accounts like that and sharing them is important because, we do have this weird fascination, I think, with just certain cases. Salem, which you mentioned, Pendle, which is obviously so well known within England. We have these individual accounts of just certain places around the whole world, Europe, Scotland, England. And within that, these volumes of accounts, again, the complexities of them, the differences between them, the diversity of them gets lost. And that comes back to what I said earlier. It's just that broad stroke of a brush that is all of them combined. But actually, when you don't look at them individually, when you don't remember them, when you don't have that detail and that context, so much of that complexity and that social understanding of what took place and how it happened gets completely and utterly lost. And that's really sad because, the people for whom this sadly brought into question, what happened to them shouldn't be lost. And they haven't been lost because we see how, the scars of it have marked communities. The folklore that then springs up from that, the ghost lore that springs up from some of the accounts where these women then become ghosts or whatever. You see how it's had that lasting impact on the community to the point where they haven't been able to let it go. And, nor should we. It's part of, again, that connection, that kind of ability to step in those same shoes and understand what happened and feel it and experience it in that visceral way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But a lot of communities wanted to forget about it because they felt that people would judge them as stupid idiots, as bumpkins for believing in witchcraft. You had that at Salem, where visitors would come in, say, 40 or 50 years later, and nobody wanted to mention it. Not because they felt bad for what they'd done, it was because they felt stupid. They felt that people would see them as this rural backwater where they still believe in witchcraft. They realised how utterly idiotic and cruel they had been, and they wanted to forget about it. And a lot of communities did that in England. They did because when the 1736 Witchcraft Act came in, that changed everything. And I think people began to. I mean, yeah, people still did believe in witchcraft, but a lot of the big cases, for instance, the Newcastle witches, that doesn't get covered enough. That needs more recognition because that's an awful event, tragic event. Dozens of mostly women were dragged up and hanged, again, on the say-so of a child and her very well-to-do family. That's where most of the accusations came from. And these women who had done absolutely nothing to anybody now find themselves accused of a thing that they can't confess to because they didn't do it. I mean, if you didn't confess, obviously, it wasn't just that. There were other ways of sometimes after hanging, your body would be burned. That would sometimes happen if you couldn't confess and that sort of thing. But how can you confess to something you haven't done and that isn't going to get you off the case? You're still going to get hanged no matter what. But the priest really wants you to confess. And that's just awful. I mean, one of the ladies in the Newcastle case, because she was born just slightly outside of the specific jurisdiction, she ended up in a dungeon. The others were held in the prison, but she was actually thrown into a flooded dungeon in a Newcastle winter. Imagine that on the time. So it was a flooded dungeon. She was chained to the wall for much of the time. It's just horrible. So some of these things I can't even imagine how this happened. You really can't. And so I don't attempt to explain it because I can't. I can only just say what happened. I will play devil's advocate sometimes just to sort of explain that, for instance, a justice or a magistrate, yeah, they could be pretty cruel and vindictive, but they weren't always. And occasionally, they felt that they were doing the right thing by their community because they're like, okay, this crime has been reported to me. I believe in it. The crime has been committed. The evidence meets the threshold. And it says here in the statutes that they must be hanged for it. So I am doing the right thing by God and by my community. That's the way some of these justices saw it. They just were just concerned about the evidence. They weren't all vindictive old men, but a lot of them were, as we found out. I mean, look at a lot of stuff has been said about hanging Judge Jeffreys and all these people. He was the old Skiridin and all these Welshmen that he had hanged there, which he didn't. He never even visited the inn. But for instance, the aforementioned Richard Baxter appeared in court before Jeffreys. Now, Richard Baxter was 74 at the time and was very infirm. And Jeffreys wanted him dragged behind a wagon and beaten and lashed as a punishment. That's the kind of man he was. So some of these justices were incredibly cruel and vindictive, but others actually believed, they really did deep down their heart, but they were doing the right thing.
It's about not sanitizing it, I think.
Yes.
And I think, again, this is where sharing it allows it to come to light. You know, we aren't sanitizing the history, we aren't sanitizing the folklore, we aren't sanitizing the events. And just being able to report it and share it is part of that important process.
Yes.
And, you know, I have a real interest in it. It's something that fascinates me because I think it is so complex. And I think because of that, it's been very much misunderstood. And again, coming back to the kind of the local element, part of what fascinates me about it is seeing how it has then left that mark, you know, how communities then were able to move on or not move on afterwards. And again, then some of the stories and the accounts that endure, that last, you know, you mentioned how just a moment ago, how, you know, many communities wanted to forget it. And I think you're spot on. And, you know, part of that, I think, is when you then see some of the ghost lore or the folklore that springs out of that, it almost, again, sanitizes what actually happened.
Yes.
You know, that person becomes a ghost, so therefore they haven't really gone.
That's a
You
really
know,
good
their
point.
death has kind of been forgotten. They are part of the community, and I think that's part of, you know, how they became reshaped and retold and endured without necessarily feeling like we were part of that. That was us part of that problem that created that situation in the first place. So again, it's fascinating to see how they survived what happened in the aftermath of that, and how those individual accounts, those trials, those cases, those women, those cunning folk, how they then endured in the stories that lasted beyond that point is again just so fascinating to me.
That's another point just on cunning folk, before we sort of move on. That was another myth that I wanted to mention. Cunning folk, as I say, were not generally oppressed. In fact, they took part in the oppression of accused witches most of the time. If you felt you were being bewitched, your first port of call was your local wise woman or cunning man. That's where you went. Oh yeah, I'll fix the witch for you. I'll give you this charm to divert the energy, and for a fee, I can even tell you who the witch is. This happened lots of times. They get or if they once they arrested the witch, they didn't know what to do. How can we prove she's a witch? How can we examine her or him? Get the cunning person in, and that's what they did. They go, well, yeah, I'll do it for a fee, and they'll come straight in. Sometimes they devise very strange ways of semi-torturing the person, like for instance, getting a new pair of shoes, soaking them and drying, then putting them on, and then putting the person in front of a fire, and then the shoes shrunk and crushed their feet. And everybody thought that the cunning man was using magic to make her feet hurt. It's such a weird thing. They really believed it, that it was happening. Oh, but yeah, the cunning folk were very, very much involved in the persecution of witches. That's on record. There is no doubt about that.
And again, just kind of thinking about some of the other aspects that you cover so brilliantly. I mean, ghost traditions appear throughout your work, and again, it's another passion, it's another love of mine. What do you think makes these ghost stories such an enduring part of the folklore of the Midlands for you?
As we spoke about before, I think it's the place, as well. I think then there's something about the place and the haunting, the feelings that people experience when they look at a place, when they arrive there and soak it in. They can see how that haunting could come about. My This is just my personal belief. I don't personally believe that supernatural or paranormal activity, if you want to call it, is the work of dead people. I just don't think it's anything to do with the dead. But I personally feel that it is something else. They're not specific individuals who perhaps once lived in a house. Again, just my personal belief. So if there's an energy there, almost a tulpa could be generated by people's feelings when they're at the place. They think, wow, this place looks spooky. Oh, wow, it's dark in here. Oh, I wonder something could live in there. If enough people feel that, could that energy create a, albeit flimsy, energy, which creates the haunting? I mean,
Yeah, that's thoughtful. Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it?
yes,
And again, coming back to some of the places you mentioned, like caves and just all the rich different landscapes that you have, and again the diversity and the history and the, you know, the tragedies, the joys, all of that
well,
is again that perfect melting pot for creating those types of experiences.
yeah. If the ancient Ram Inn was brightly lit, repainted, and you removed all the sort of occult paraphernalia from it, would it have the same effect on people? No, it wouldn't. But if it is genuinely haunted, then surely those things would still be there. So I really do think it's the aspect of the place that has a lot to do with it in some places. One of my favourite haunted locations is the ruins of St Mary's Church at Avonbury, near Bromyard in Herefordshire. It really is something else. You've got this ruined Norman church, just the tower and a little bit of the nave is still there. but all the graves are still there. It's completely overgrown and it's surrounded by trees. And the river kind of loops around it. The yard of the church is within that loop of the River Frome. And it's incredible, the feeling. I visited there under all sorts of conditions, in the dark, hot summer day. I've been there in the snow. Different feeling every time, but you really do feel something there. Not just within the ruins, but the surrounding land at the yard. When you go up to the water's edge and you feel it, because the stories and the folklore around there are about apparently a witch was executed who couldn't be buried in the churchyard, so they buried her in the riverbed under a stone. There's a liminal place, neither one thing nor the other. And then they say that years later, a man was hanged for arson. He burnt down a house owned by the Bishop of Hereford, who allegedly haunted the place. He was going around the houses and sort of tapping on doors and things and wandering around the graveyard. So the classic 12 priests with their candles forced him into a silver box, again, the classic snuff box, threw him in where the witch was supposedly buried. So now you have two ghosts in there. Well, what do you know? Real life now happens. In 2010, a young man was murdered along that little minor road that leads down to it. He was beaten in the car. Where did they dispose of his body? Right there in the water. Wrapped him up in a sheet, put him in the water. And I spoke to the lady who discovered the body. She described it to me, the incident. Incredible. I mean, what were the chances of that happening? So that, to me, that feels like a place that absorbs darkness, energy. It really, a lot of people report seeing these sort of shimmery things, almost like from the Predator movie when it's in its sort of invisibility mode. This sort of shimmery thing moving around. A lot of people have seen that, heard sounds, heard bells ringing, organs playing, all sorts of things and noises. During the 1990s, it used to be a teenage rite of passage to spend the night there before we had, smartphones and things. And there are people that I know who won't even speak about their experiences there. They were that shaken. They would never go back there. So that really is a place. I'll say it's one of my favourite haunted spots. But I think there's something about the aspect of the place that creates that energy. I can't go too deeply into that because I don't actually understand it. It's something I need to research a lot more. But that's my feeling, that the place, and then after that feedback that we give it, that feedback loop, this place is spooky, or this is strange. But when we go into a cave or a tunnel, primal fears come out, and it's almost as if the presence inside there senses that. We complete the circuit, and then the paranormal event happens. You see something or feel something. Those are my sort of feelings on that subject. How the place relates to the haunting itself.
And you mentioned a place that for you really resonates in terms of that atmosphere. Do you have any other, ghost legends that from your research that have just really fascinated or intrigued you that have come up?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and not necessarily ghosts either, but they passed into folklore. For instance, Bella and the Witch Elm. Now, there's a murder case which has now passed firmly into folklore. It's gone from true crime into it's a legend of Britain. It's crazy. It's sort of mentioned, along with sort of the Hunter and these other literary things that come about. But this is a murder, an awful murder. A tiny little woman. I mean, she was what? Not even 5 foot. I think she was 4'11", estimated. Somebody killed her. Somebody put her remains inside that tree. That one keeps me up at night, wondering about it. What happened? Who was she? How did that happen? What's going on there? Because at the time, that was during World War II. At the end of the Second World War, we then had the Pitchfork murder, Charles Walton murder, Lower Quinton and Warwickshire, which wasn't related, but with the story of the New Forest Coven and the early Wiccans and their cone of power during World War II. you'd be forgiven for thinking that there were covens of people out doing nefarious things involving murder and sacrifice. Because there's another case in Worcestershire which just doesn't get any attention at all. And that's the one that keeps me up at night, really. That is the one. And that's the murder of Harry Dean on Breeden Hill. And I say murder because there's nothing else that could account for his death. But just briefly put, Harry was a reporter for a while. He became obsessed with the idea that some sort of occult group was meeting up on Breeden Hill, dedicated to Pan, because that was the sort of coverall pagan deity at the time. Dennis Wheatley was publishing his novels at the time. The Devil Rides Out, he probably read that. So, but he gave up reporting, became a solicitor's clerk. But one day, nobody knows why, what he was doing, he got up from his desk, left work, took the bus to Breeden Hill instead of going home to his wife in Tewkesbury. He never came home. His wife, very concerned. During the night, she contacted all the members of his rugby team. They all got over there and started searching the hill, looking for the guy. Can't find him anywhere. Police joined in. As the dawn rose, they found him in this sort of very secluded old medieval quarry. He was lying there and he'd been strangled with his own tie. Now, a doctor was brought up on the village from Kemerton. She proclaimed it an accident and said, well, it's obvious what's happened here. He stood up on a rock to look around. He slipped, stood on his own tie, and somehow choked himself to death. But that's just ludicrous. That can't happen. And so he's gone down in history as this accidental death, but the rumours persist. If he was murdered, who murdered him? Why did he get up from his desk and just head straight to Breeden Hill that day? Did he have a contact? Was somebody going to say, hey, Harry, I'm going to show you what's going on up there. I'm in the know. Meet me there. That could have happened. Did he see something going on? Some weird ritual, perhaps? Was he? I mean, I'm writing a fictional story, almost a horror story itself. Was it even arranged for him to go there? But it's very sad because that guy died there somehow. Somebody knows what happened. Something was clearly covered up there. So there you have another occult associated murder during World War II. And this one was 1939. And it just doesn't get enough exposure. More people need to be covering this one because perhaps some detail will be dug up. I mean, who was it? Howard T. Wilkins. I mean, he was known for writing nonsense about Lemuria and these sort of birth mysteries and things. But he became obsessed with the case for a while, that he concluded that somebody had invoked an elemental creature which had shoved Harry off the cliff, and he ended up on the floor of the quarry. And that's how he was choked with his tie. Well, that's even more silly than just somebody simply murdering him. But yeah, that one keeps me up at night. It really does. Now, one would be forgiven for thinking that his ghost could haunt that area if you think that supernatural activity is the behaviour of the remains of dead people somehow. Everybody that walks up through that section past the quarry says the same thing, how unsettling it is. You can really feel it in the air. There's something there. So perhaps it's not perhaps the ghost of Harry, it's the energy that people were raising that is just still lingering around. I mean, they say that about a lot of places, about some of the stone circles, the Rollright stones, etc., that people are projecting energy. About Chanctonbury Ring, that's another notorious one. And they say the amount of things that went on there, occult groups, yeah, it's soaked it up like a battery. It's charged the battery of the place. And now that battery discharged, when the right person comes along, connects and creates that circuit, and they have an experience.
You're right. And I think just to kind of echo what you said, though, accounts like that, they do need to be spoken of because at the end of the day, it could reveal a clue, some missing information. Somebody could come forward and have something to say that could lead to a result. Got to be something that's good. If what happened can be discovered, then it puts that person to rest.
Well, whenever I make a post about something on Breeden Hill is a really interesting place. There are so many weird things, locations and structures and things on the hill, and the stories, they're amazing. I mean, you've got an Iron Age hill fort on the top. There was an Anglo-Saxon village within the hill fort. Everything there's a lost stone circle, a couple of lost megaliths. There's a Bronze Age burial mound with the remains of a set of stocks set up next to it. All sorts of things there. But anyway, people always comment. I get a couple of people saying they were always told as a child, play up there during the day, but never go up there at night because there are people up there doing things that it's not meant for you. I hear this a lot. Older people keep making little comments. That's what they were always told. Just don't go up the hill during the dark because there are people up there who are doing things that you're not to get involved with. That really makes me wonder. I don't want to become too conspiracy minded on that, and let the whole thing. I mean, it's kind of fun to imagine that, to let that feeling hang over us that, there are sort of occult groups like Mo Carter from The Devil Rides Out, no Rex, you fool, are you dead? Are you meddle with the occult? And that sort of thing. That's fun, but it does make you wonder. It does make you wonder.
It does. And, I think, again, part of it stems from, again, just this shared language, this shared experience within communities that do get passed down from generation to generation. And, things like devil folklore and the way that it shapes the landscape and churches and local traditions and communities, that becomes something that's seeped into the bones of the place. And then again, some of the accounts that you've spoken about, you kind of see how they morph together. So it becomes that new aspect, the new retelling of it. That again, these things that get whispered about, don't go up there at nighttime. Fine during the day, but don't go up there at all at night. You see how it starts to reshape some of the things that get passed down from one generation to the next, that just are this lived experience.
Yes.
Of things that get whispered about and not spoken about.
Yes. And the more we whisper about them and start saying them loudly, the more we are almost creating a new aspect of the folklore of the place. For instance, Bella Snap in a Long Barrow in Gloucestershire, on top of Cleve Hill. So it's now gaining a reputation as one of Britain's most haunted ancient sites. Because most of our ancient sites, we associate them with sort of paganism, revering ancestors, etc. A couple of them have that very odd atmosphere about them. Wayland Smithy is another one where really strange things go on there. And I've found that Bella Snap, again, each time I make a post about Bella Snap on Facebook, for example, the comments come rolling in about weird experiences people have. They feel that something is shoving them in the back as they leave the place. Like, get out, go back down the hill. I felt that. I felt as if there were a procession of people behind me. I kept turning around. It was weird. Like they're all, yeah, come on, keep moving. You're at the head, keep going on. One lady slipped and banged her head, and she felt as if she was shoved and kicked. Another lady was going through the woods at the bottom, and a branch of a tree that had fallen off and had been sort of supported by the other branches decided at that moment to fall down onto her head and knock her out. A lot of people gathered round. And you have all these weird things happening around Bella Snap. People saying that they're seeing rows of monks walking around the fields and things like that, or tablecloth of their picnic whipped away like a magician from under them. That's it. So if we concentrate all those stories together, we are now creating a new folklore about that place, about Bella Snap. It's now a haunted place. And isn't that wonderful, how folklore changes, how it evolves?
So why do you think, just kind of following on from some of the talking points that we've just had, why do you think, things like devil folklore is something that is, a really powerful part of folklore? Why is that such a kind of a big part of it, an inherent part of it, do you think?
Well, that's a big subject. Some great academics who have worked on that. Professor Darren Aldridge and Professor Hutton have written some fantastic books about this sort of thing, the devil himself and the belief in it. a lot of it goes back to hatred and fear of Catholics. A lot of it did come out of that. A lot of the fear of witchcraft came out of that. Fear of Catholicism and the nonsense said about Catholicism and the othering of Catholics. I mean, look at the things that soldiers were saying when Cromwell conducted his oppressive operations in Ireland, for instance. I mean, the people believed that the Irish people had tails, but they weren't human. They said, "Oh yeah, I'll show you this. They've got tails." That's what people believe. So I think a lot of it came out of that. There was a sort of religious side to it, and then the uncertainty of the Civil War, the fear, the terror, and the uncertainty. People just didn't know what was going to happen next year. Am I still going to have a home? Is this town even going to exist? My cousin's gone over to the king. Will I ever speak to him again? I'm supposed to hate him now. And that's what everybody said. I think those sorts of fears came out of that, out of religion and out of the Civil War. For me personally, from my research, I believe those are possibly the biggest factors in the amount of devil folklore came about. This fear that there was something in the land, what the evil was afoot. Because sometimes they refer to Charles I as the man of blood, because he insisted on going ahead with this war that he couldn't win. So, but he insisted on all these deaths and all this destruction. But sometimes they were just referred to as the evil or the scourge. And so people almost saw the enemy, whichever side they're on, as just this throbbing, pulsing evil in the landscape. So that's going to be personified as the devil. So I think it just became the common thing to sort of call, this is a spooky place. Let's call it the devil's punch bowl, or the devil's shoe or something. Everything was devil. What it was definitely not. It was nothing to do with Christianity. With the sort of the clergy, any sort of stamping out paganism. There's nothing to do with that. People think that, but most of these devil names for places only came about during the sort of 1600s and onwards. These aren't ancient names. So it was nothing to do with converting people from paganism. Now, these were names given to them by the people of, the working class people of the area. They gave them those names. The devil's spinning, the devil's spinning top, anything like that. Everything's devil's den. There are lots of devil's dens. Look at the dolmen, the devil's den down in Wiltshire. And I spent an entire day looking for a cave called the Devil's Den. I ended up soaked through to my skin because it was described in a Victorian pamphlet as a place where people went insane if they crawled inside. So I figured, I have to find that. And it's in Worcestershire, it's near the village of Rock, but I had to give up on that one. But yeah, those are my feelings. It comes out of a sense of fear and uncertainty due to political events around, and this just sense that there was evil afoot in the land, personified by the devil.
And if I could just follow on from that, because I think you actually have said pretty much so many of the things that I think with regards to devil folklore.
Yeah.
It is almost that thing that you can name, because there is nothing more frightening than something that you can't physically imagine and see and experience in that kind of tangible form. So if you can put a name to it, you can start to demystify it. You can have an explanation for why your crops failed or for why that particular rugged bit of mountain landscape is where it is. You can name something that explains it.
Yes.
And it's the cultural reference that they all recognize. And like you said, any time of turbulence, religious upheaval, plague, whatever it is, crops failing.
Yes.
The devil becomes the explanation, the thing that you can name that explains that thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the modern equivalent is the shadow figure, Hat Man, all these new incarnations of this that come through in culture, in folklore, that becomes the way that you can name and express that fear and that danger, that element that becomes the known reason for it. That's kind of my take on it, just to kind of echo what you said.
That's a very interesting point, Michelle. That is a very good point. I hadn't thought of it like that. I see a lot of people in America, conspiracy theorists, it's always this sort of cabal of Satanists. That's their evil. That's how they personify it. It's always the Satanists, you know. And I guess these days it's just they. People refer to them as the Epstein class or that sort of thing. It's just this sort of just this general evil. Evil seems to be transferred onto the higher ups now, rather than us seeing it around us. Oh, it's all the fault of the higher ups. It's all the fault of the establishment, a rotten establishment. I think there's a sense that politics, religion, social issues, everything, it's becoming corrupt. And it's rotting, and people don't trust it. That's what people fear now. Authority. They don't trust authority anymore, just from recent events. And they are, people are losing faith, aren't they, in the electoral system and everything, because they don't see change at all, no matter which way they vote. So people are seeing it as wrong, and I think that's the new evil. It's those, it's the higher ups now. They are the evil one. That is the devil. That's one candidate certainly that I'm seeing out there spoken about.
So do you have a particular, devil legend from the Midlands that, again, just perfectly captures the character of the region for you?
Yeah, well, there are quite a few. As I said, I just mentioned Devil's Den. I mean, that was quite funny. If you'd have seen me scrabbling around in the mud, trying to find this non-existent cave, you'd have had a good laugh about it. There's a story from Breeden Hill. I'll say one of my favourite places. A farmer wanted a worker. He took this guy on. He began to suspect there was something about this guy. He could mow a field by himself in a day with a scythe. He can milk 100 cows in the morning. It dawned on the farmer that this was the devil. Oh my God, I've just employed the devil. How am I going to get rid of him? So he gave him all these talks. Go and mow 10 fields now. And the devil just mowed all of it. Oh, go and shoe every horse all the way to London. Yeah. Bang, bang, bang. They're all shooting. Well, how am I going to get rid of him? So he goes, as we said before, the cunning man. He goes to see his local cunning man, who tells him, take one of your wife's hairs. What sort of hair has she got? He said, oh, it's kind of curly. It's in ringlets. Fantastic. Get the curliest hair she has off her head. Give it to the devil. Tell him, I want you to make it straight. I don't care how you do it. Make that hair straight. Don't get rid of him. So the devil puts it on an anvil and he starts banging away. He heats it up. He tries to melt it, quench it, everything. He's just whacking away with this big lump hammer, a single hair. And of course, you're not going to make if he'd have known about modern straightening irons, perhaps he'd have had better luck. But he's just whacking away with a hammer and he can't hammer this hair straight. So he just throws a hammer down, said, yeah, you're right, I give up. You can sack me. So, devil, you're fired. And off he went. That's probably my favourite devil story. And that's a good Worcestershire one.
So, Hugh, thinking about some of the different regions and landscapes and parts of the area that we've been speaking of, do you think there are any locations, any places that you would recommend that you think, besides some of the places that we've talked about, that you just think are a great place to soak up some of this atmosphere and the folklore and the experiences that you've been sharing and speaking of in the podcast today?
Yes, I mean, the aforementioned Breeden Hill, it's a big place and you can attack it by any route. Stanton Moor, up in the Derbyshire Peak District, a very atmospheric place. But an unsung hero is Witchbury Hill in Worcestershire, just outside Hagley. Now, Witchbury Hill boasts the famous obelisk with the graffiti, who put Bella in a witch elm. You can see it from the road down below. If you walk up to it, now that wasn't where they found Bella. She was found in Hagley Wood across the other side of the road. But there's something about it. You walk up that hill to the obelisk, you can feel it in the air. Now, there's a big Iron Age hill fort behind it, and it's completely forested over. And you can follow the earthworks, and there really is something in those woods. It's thick in the air. You can feel the atmosphere. I don't know what it is. somebody planted a big circle of yew trees. It was probably something to do with Viscount Cobham, who owned the land. But they put this great big sort of estate of yews all the way around the hill fort. Now, there was a gigantic one in the centre, which has now been burned down. But there's just something about it. You just feel that the outside world is just shut away. You're now on another planet, in another dimension. It's just incredible. Like the air you're breathing is different. So I would highly recommend Witchbury Hill and the hill fort behind it. Yeah, as a good place to explore. Yeah, that's an easy one. That's an easy access to sort of get that feeling, that sensation that you're traveling through time, and that there's folklore in the air. Because they used to say that it was the last stand of Caractacus there, and it was also a burial place of King Arthur. So there's plenty to be going on there. Yes, Witchbury Hill in Worcestershire.
And just to kind of finish our conversation, where's the best place for people to be able to grab a hold of your books, to be able to find out more about what you're doing? Are there any particular kind of places, signposts for best ways to follow you and to keep abreast of what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I have my website, www.mysteriesofmercia.com. But Facebook, my Facebook page, Hugh Williams, although they list it as Mysteries of Mercia for some reason, has become a monster, a Frankenstein's monster. It's huge. So I would say that's probably the best place to get the latest information. I post every single day, sometimes twice a day. So yeah, if you want a flavour of what I'm doing, and there are links to my books there as well. Or you can go straight to Lulu Publishing, their bookstore there. Search my name and you can find my books there. But there's a button on my website on the mysteriesofmercia.com. You can buy my books there. Or as I say, you can go to Facebook, my author page, Hugh Williams, and you can find my books there too and get a good flavour of what I do.
And I will make sure to include those links, Hugh, in the podcast description notes, as well as on the website, so that anybody who's listening to this who wants to explore this region more fully, or for the first time maybe, and if they've not come across you, can just easily click on those links and be taken to your Facebook page or
Yes.
have access to the books. Because I think, my hope is that listening to the podcast, that people are going to be really inspired to want to find out more about this region. Now, as we've talked about before, it's not as well known. It's not so well publicized. It's not an area that's had that kind of attention in the way that I think it deserves. So you're doing an incredible job at sharing that magic, sharing the folklore, sharing the history,
Thank you.
and connecting us to these stories, so that we can learn about them, we can be inspired by them. All those different elements of magic and wonder and awe and fear and trepidation that comes from learning about these kinds of stories and accounts and what the region has to offer. I hope people are inspired to want to discover it for themselves if they haven't already.
Thanks. I really do appreciate that. That means a lot. And that's all I want to do. Just inspire people to go out and discover it for themselves. That's it. I don't promote myself as an individual. I know, some do, but I barely ever appear in pictures. I don't like it. I'm just promoting the folklore and the weirdness and the strangeness of the Midlands. That is all I want to do. I'm absolutely passionate about it. And I would just encourage everybody to, if you like what I've done, please do go out there and investigate further for yourself.
And, I would just echo that, for people listening, the big takeaway is that this is a region that is absolutely full of high strangeness and weirdness. So, if that is something that you are interested in and maybe has surprised you, this is now that opportunity to dip the toe in and explore just such a fascinating wealth and myriad of different accounts and reports and experiences that, again, this region just has in abundance. So honestly, thank you so much for giving up your time just to share your passion and your knowledge. I mean, this is just scratching the surface, but hopefully it's a stepping point for people listening. So thank you so much for your time this evening. in coming along and talking about it, Hugh.
Thank you, Michelle. It was an absolute pleasure. No problem at all.
And you're welcome back anytime. So if there's things that come up
Yeah.
or things that you think would be valuable to share, honestly, the door is always, always open on the podcast. You've just been incredible. I've loved the conversation back and forth. So again, I think people listening are going to be just as inspired by that and want to hopefully follow you and dive into the books.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
And I'll say goodbye to everybody listening. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. You can follow us on social media for updates and more intriguing stories. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious.